So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Jocelyn Casares Willingham, and I am an assistant professor of law and one of the directors of the Immigration and Human Rights Clinic at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. Today, I am beyond thrilled to have Professor Judkins, the director of our Criminal Defense and Racial Justice Clinic, who also has a master's in social work herself, in conversation with our two St. Louis University School Law guests, social worker and adjunct instructor Lauren Choate, and Criminal Defense Clinic Director and Professor of Law Susan McGraugh. Today, they will be exploring navigating conflicts and professional tensions and how to strengthen clinic and social work collaborations. Thank you all three for joining us. And with that, I'll hand off the mic to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn, and hello to everyone. I want to thank our guests again, Sue and Lauren, for being here. I know it's a busy time of year for people in academia with finals, grading papers, and exams, and all of that. So thank you both for being here, and I thought we would start with you giving us a little bit of background about like what you do and where you're at. So yes, take it away.
Hi, my name's Sue McGraugh. I'm the director of the Criminal Defense Clinic at St. Louis University School of Law. I have been in this position. This is my 22nd year, so been around a while. I started at the St. Louis City Public Defender's Office and the Conflicts Office. I learned so much on the job being a public defender, but always kind of wished I'd had an opportunity like the ones Lauren and I tried to create for our clients. I'll say the program started 10, 11 years ago. Lauren was a master's in social work student, and I had noticed that so many of my clients were just cycling through the courts because they had such bad addiction and mental health problems that they just came back around. They couldn't get out of the system. So I had asked the School of Social Work to send me a student, and they sent me Lauren, and she has been magnificent, and we have been together for 10 years. Lauren?
Thank you, Sue. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name's Lauren Choate. I'm a licensed clinical social worker at SLU Law's legal clinics. I mostly work out of the criminal defense clinic, but every now and then I'll kind of help out on certain cases in the other clinics. I got my undergrad and my master's in social work. And like Sue said, when I was a master's student, I was really interested in the intersection of mental health and criminal law. I worked at a mental health court, which opened my eyes to a lot of different nuances that I think I was missing beforehand. And as I was graduating, it was coinciding with the closure in St. Louis of a forensic mental health emergency room that we were lucky enough to have for a little bit. Department of Mental Health was cutting their funding and they closed it. So previously, when police officers encountered someone who was having what was clearly a mental health issue, and there wasn't necessarily a very large felony going on, instead of taking them to jail, they could take them to this forensic emergency room where they could get help. My thesis for my master's program was on the closing of that. So when Sue reached out to the School of Social Work, that's how I got connected with Sue. And I did a year-long internship there, which is where we really worked out the kinks with this and saw where I could help and where I couldn't help. And then I was hired on, and I have mostly been there ever since.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And could you tell us more about, since you joined forces, what has that looked like in the clinical space? A lawyer, a social worker coming together and serving clients. What has that looked like?
What does it look like? It's had a couple different iterations. Primarily now, so we will take any criminal case from a misdemeanor up to a murder. We recently took a death penalty case. We try to treat the whole client. We, of course, are looking at the criminal problem and the solution to that. But as they say, the charge is not always the biggest problem. So we take a lot of time to find out what's going on with the client, what's going on in their life, what's going on mental health, physically. We work with clients who almost, and Lauren, you'll have to give the number on this, are uniformly have suffered trauma at some point in their lives. So while the law students and I primarily focus on the resolution of the criminal case, including bond hearings, depositions, our secret weapon really is Lauren. And I'll let you explain, Lauren, what you do.
So when we first started this collaboration, it really was a focus on clients who had a severe mental illness, clients who had bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, very severe PTSD. And it's evolved and expanded to now any criminal case, because we notice that even if a client doesn't have a serious mental illness, like Sue said, they didn't come into contact with the criminal justice system because everything in their life was going perfect. In fact, everything in their life was normally going catastrophically terrible. And they were oftentimes performing pretty well under the circumstances of what they were going through. So in addition to what Sue discussed in terms of trying to assist where we can to help them kind of leave us better than they found us, a lot of the work I do is also explaining to the prosecutor, the judge or jury, whoever the fact finder is that we're trying to persuade, how our client got into the situation they got in and what they need to get out of that situation in a way that is compelling, that is not scary, and I think what we would consider to be a much more true version of our client's life and situation than the one that the prosecution puts forward and that the judge often sees. Would you agree, Sue?
Absolutely. And the clinic has since evolved since we have a lot of interest in sentencing mitigation also. And so the clinic has evolved into one that is very mindful of sentencing mitigation. And then myself and Lauren and our wonderful colleague, Matt Vigil, also now teach once a year a sentencing mitigation class. Those of you who work in criminal will know that very few people go to trial. And so a lot of what the work a criminal defense lawyer does is arranging for plea disposition. In federal court, that looks like a sentencing memorandum. Our students are taught to do that. But importantly, a lot of what they're learning from Lauren is dealing with trauma, dealing with mental illness. Criminal defense lawyers, that's kind of our bread and butter. We are with people who have lived some really horrible experiences. And so Lauren is able to translate a lot of the mental health diagnoses and findings for the students. She teaches all the clinics in our clinical program about trauma and about mental health. And that's really something that I think most law school curriculums are missing. That becomes a very important piece of what we do.
And in engaging with training students, both law students and the social work students, how are you bringing the social work students into the clinic, the legal clinic, where you're serving clients who may be charged with crimes or who are facing other traumas? It may be an immigration clinic, it may be some other clinic, but how are you getting the students from social work to join forces?
Yeah, so that has also kind of looked different ways over the past 10 years. It started out, I'll be honest, if you were interested, I'd take you. I'd take 3 at a time. Let's do this. As our cases became more and more serious and I think the law school saw the need more and more for law students to be trained in a lot of what I was doing. I've taken less social work students and a bit more focused on the law students. So when I'm doing social work stuff, I am very rarely doing it separately or alone. I almost always have a law student with me, because the idea is when they go off and practice, they will likely not have a social worker in their office. And if they do, they will not be me who has 15 clients. They will be someone else who has 80 clients, and they need to learn how to do this themselves. So a lot of my focus right now is on law students as opposed to social work students. However, I do still, when there are social work students who are very interested in this type of work, I do take them. And the fear for me, at least at first, and I know for all of the Masters of Social Work students that I've taken, it was their fear as well, was these law students are going to be like, I'm not listening to some social work student. What am I supposed to do with them? And in our experience, and I mean, I do have a fondness for the students who choose to take criminal defense clinics. But all of the students have really welcomed the MSW students and recognized that, oh, yes, this is a resource of someone who can explain to me why my client keeps telling me they're going to come to this meeting and they don't, or why my client calls me and yells at me and then 2 days later calls me and says, oh my gosh, you're the best attorney in the world. Thank you so much. So that collaboration is the trickiest part for me, is balancing the needs of a social work student and a law student at the same time. If you are prioritizing both, because I don't think it's appropriate, and different social workers have different ideas on this. I'm not going to go in and do some big mitigation interview or something that's really sensitive with 3 students with me all kind of staring down the client. I only take one with me at a time. So that has been the trickiest thing for me to navigate when you have both. Sue, I'll let you kind of jump in and see what you have thought about when we've integrated the students as well.
Yeah, I will add that our sentencing mitigation class I just spoke about is interdisciplinary. So we take social work students, Lauren recruits students from social work. We have a very, very good relationship with the faculty and administration at social work. They have been so easy to work with, so supportive, and we consider ourselves really lucky that way. It used to be, I will say, so we are in a clinic space where every clinic has its own workroom. And one of the things that I think was really helpful that we did early on was move the social work students into the attorney workspace. God bless Lauren, for a while they were all working out of her office. And we decided to try having them with the law students. And I can't say enough about both our social workers, social work students and law students. They're so enthusiastic from learning from each other. They enjoy each other's company. It's been very successful.
And to that point, I think one of the important things about combining the 2 disciplines is that, especially at the beginning, is there not being much division between this is a social work task and this is a legal task. Especially at the beginning, the law student comes to the social work stuff, the social work student comes to the law stuff.
And if I can touch a minute, Lauren, on what you said about how we were worried that the law students might be dismissive of the social work students. Lauren is the co-director of my clinic. We make it very clear at the beginning of the year that if Lauren gives an instruction, if Lauren gives a task, it is like it's coming from me. So we are partners, or I'd like to believe we see each other as partners in this. And so the students are made aware of the fact that lawyers are not more important than social workers right from the beginning. And I think you would have to ask Lauren, I think that's part of our success. I mean, there are times I have to drag them out of Lauren's office because I need them for something, because they really enjoy getting her insight on things.
And how have you had to navigate tensions that might arise between confidentiality and mandated reporting? How do you deal with that?
Lauren, could you share our story that we think so perfectly?
I would love to.
Thank you.
Can I first explain our model of how we kind of think about it? Just so like I said, with everything being together, we don't view social work services as separate from the legal services. So because although we are partners, although I work for the defense attorney, and that gives me personally a lot of cover. Our clients are only getting social work services because they are requesting legal services, and their attorney has decided that a social worker could be helpful in their legal representation. So I abide by the confidentiality rules of a lawyer. There's a lot of trickiness and nuance to that, and it's not always perfect, and it's different by state, but that's how we do it. So I think the story Sue is referring to is we are lucky enough that, knock on wood, I know now that I say this, I'm going to jinx myself, but we haven't had a lot of conflicts around like a duty to report child abuse or neglect. Where we've had the ethical conflicts are around self-harm, danger to self. For those of you who aren't social workers, the social work rule in Missouri is if someone has a credible suicidal threat or suicidal ideation, and people interpret it differently, if they will not go to the hospital, you call 911 and have an ambulance come to get them. You can imagine how that could change the relationship and be viewed from an attorney's standpoint. So we had a client once who had a history of, I'm trying to get all the details right, a history of drug use. I believe that's why we were working with him. He had drug charges. And we all had a very close relationship with him. And he called me one day, of course, I think when I was in the middle of another meeting, and picked up the phone, and is this what you're talking about, Sue?
Yes.
Yeah. We've had a few like this, where he said he had just taken all of the drugs he had, and he just wanted to thank me for all of the help I gave him and say goodbye. So I tried to figure out what drugs he had taken. He wouldn't tell me. I tried to figure out where he was. He wouldn't tell me because I think he knew that I would call 911. So I said, I'd love to come and say goodbye in person. He told me he was on the bus, but he could get off at the next stop, told me where that next stop was, and said I could come meet him. So to get an attorney's attention, because I was on the phone, I just kept throwing highlighters at my door really loudly until an attorney came and said, and I kind of held up a sign that said, like, get Sue. And I think another colleague came, and I told them the situation and said, I really felt like I needed to call 911 to meet us at the bus stop. The problem was he almost assuredly had drugs on him. He was out on bond on a drug felony. He had a lot of drug felony priors. We did not want him to pick up another charge because his legal team called the police on him. We decided that it sounded like if he didn't get an ambulance there, he would die. So unfortunately, you can't call 911 and say, just bring the ambulance, not the police. We called 911. Me and another attorney, so not Sue, but another attorney in our clinic, Brendan Roediger, he came with me, and we met him there. We got there before the ambulance. But then when the ambulance and the police came, he realized what was going on. got really upset, understandably. I think the police did find drugs in his pocket. But because we had an attorney there, he helped kind of smooth things out. And he did not end up getting additional charges. They took him to the hospital, and he lived. So we have stories like that, where luckily I have been acculturated into the legal defense profession enough that to me, I really understand that you cannot call the police on your clients. The problem is a new social worker could experience that and say, there's no question at all, I'm calling 911 immediately. And that's where it's so great to have these relationships where we respect each other's ethical duties. Because Sue not only understood my obligation, but Sue also didn't want this client to die as well. So that was how we handled it. And I don't know if it was perfect, but that is how we handled it in the moment. And we were glad it worked out, but you could see a situation where it didn't, and he did get charged, and he could have ended up with charges.
Yeah, and for us, from the legal side, in terms of disclosing what he had said, we felt it fit under the reasonably certain death or serious bodily injury exception and applied that to our own client. I will say I didn't go because the lawyer who went with Lauren has a lot of experience in this area, and he was kind enough to accompany her and sort it out. I think that's been our biggest adventure in that. I'll say I do not take child abuse and child sexual abuse cases because I think that creates too many potential problems in terms of our mutual ethical obligations. And again, knock on wood, we're just cursing ourselves, Lauren,
I know.
that it has worked very well. Our clients are most likely to be the victims of childhood sex abuse and physical abuse.
How do you evaluate the effectiveness of your interdisciplinary collaboration in achieving positive outcomes for your clients? Are there certain metrics that you have to report back to the institution to keep this collaboration going, or you keep track of it yourself?
So it's a relative. Lauren, did you want to answer that?
No, please, you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I work and have consistently worked for a law school administration that has been 110% supportive of what we do. So I will say that Lauren only became a permanent line, as they say, 2 years ago. So there were years when we weren't sure if Lauren would have a job the next year, but luckily we have a funder who is a very big believer in the importance of clinic, who has assured funding going forward. So I don't have to do things like, and he does not require any paperwork or proof. So I have not had to quantify our results and attempt to prove our value either to the administration or the funder. And we know how lucky we are.
That's great.
Yeah,
Lauren,
I will say that we tried to figure out what are the metrics we would study, and we had such a hard time because every case is so different. It's hard to just say, let's look at what sentence they got, because there's so many factors that have little to do with social work on that end. I will say the best study that I've seen is one, I think the Urban Institute did it, and I'm very sorry, I can send an email link when I get it, but there is a study that looked at Bronx Defenders and New York, I think, legal aid, and compared cases that had a social worker and cases that didn't have a social worker. It was a pretty big study, and it found that it did not impact recidivism, but it did impact length of sentence, which we at first were like, oh, it doesn't impact recidivism. That's disappointing. But to be able to say that these clients got lower sentences and recidivism didn't increase at all was really promising and did catch a lot of people's attention.
Wow, that's a great outcome. What, if any, role do you think your institution should play in spreading the word of collaborations such as this? You know, nationally, there's a lot of schools. There are some law schools that incorporate MSW programs within them, or vice versa, however you want to put that. But I guess it's a two-part question. Like, what, if anything more, could your institution do to support you? It sounds like they're 110% behind you already. And then how do you see this growing nationally? Because a lot of great work comes out of this collaboration for a criminal defense clinic, but for all clinics.
That's a good question. I will say one thing that Lauren has done to improve the involvement of social workers in the criminal justice system is that she has mentored probably every social worker in a law office in St. Louis at some point. We were really the first people in St. Louis to be doing this work. But Lauren has worked with the public defender social workers, the prosecutor's office when have hired social workers, and the first person they call is Lauren to see what the best way to do this. So I really see the work of our clinic, and especially Lauren's work, having an impact on the quality and number of services that criminal defendants get in St. Louis. And now I think also Missouri.
And when we first started doing this, there weren't a lot of other people doing this in the area to talk to. But to your point, it's becoming so much more common that now we'll get students who say, oh, my last internship was at the public defender's office and I worked with a great social worker there. Or when I was at the U.S. Attorney's office, we worked with a great social worker. So they're coming with a little bit more of a foundation of what our role is and an understanding of why it's important to understand how we can complement each other's work. And that's been really nice to get the students already kind of ready to learn about it. I think too, one way that it will pick up momentum in law schools is I think so many law schools now are having issues around law students' mental health. And while I am not a social worker for our law students, I do think a big part of our clinic is learning how to do a murder first case, how to talk to clients about their trauma, and then go home and still be able to be a mother or a partner or a person so that you can do this long term without kind of having, everyone kind of knows the stereotype or has heard stories of criminal defense attorneys who do this for a long time and then kind of blow up their lives in really big ways or blow up their practice. And we take it really seriously, the idea that learning to become a criminal defense attorney, either as part of the social worker on the team or as the attorney, involves not just knowing how to handle the law, but how to do this work in a way that you can continue to do it and like it and feel like you can keep doing it. So I think as a focus on law student mental health becomes more and more prominent in law schools, this piece could become bigger.
I'll give a recent anecdote. We had a trial this semester, and it was actually a 1983 case, but a young man had been gunned down and killed by the police in his own home. And some of the pictures, of course, were very graphic. I spoke to the students. They assured me, I can see these pictures, it'll be okay. Well, one student was not okay. And he was very reluctant to tell me because, of course, they think that if you've done this for a long time, you're immune to it. And I would think maybe that he couldn't handle it. So he went to Lauren and was able to communicate with Lauren, who then shared with me the struggles that the client was having. And that was extraordinarily helpful to us.
And working with law students as well as some social work students, when they come in to assist or collaborate in this way, do you set out terms or what you expect roles will be for each group, the law students versus the social work students? Or what is your approach when you bring them all together?
One thing that I am clear with the social work students about is not giving legal advice. That's probably the big boundary line that I draw, because after you've been doing this for a while and sat in on a lot of meetings with attorneys and heard the attorneys talk about things, it is very easy for you to get a question from a client and be like, I know this answer. I'll just tell him now. And that impulse is there. And so I'm very strict with the MSW students about, like, even if you know the answer, we say, that's a great question. I know Sue or whoever has an answer to it. I'm going to write it down and then I'll get back to you. I personally, Sue, you may do something different that has gone over my head or something, but we try and integrate it so much that outside of giving legal advice, we try and just have everyone do everything together. And then it kind of arises from there. I know that's not a nice, clear boundary answered, but really the only thing I am very strict on with the social work students is giving legal advice.
In our sentencing mitigation class that we teach, the final problem is a group in this great social work tradition, is a group project, and we'll have 2 or 3 law students with a social worker so that they have and we give them a case file that we created, and they will all have to work through the problem together. What they're going to do is they come up with a sentencing memo as well as an oral presentation at the end of the class is one of their assignments. And so we make them get in there and work together, to work it out together, to see what each other brings. And it's been a good experience. It's worked very well.
I guess I would ask, what emerging trends or innovations in legal and social work practice do you think will enhance interdisciplinary collaboration in the future?
So here's my outspoken comment on it. I think that lawyers and law schools and judges need to admit that this isn't working, what we're doing in the criminal justice system. That lawyers and judges need to let go of the idea that only they can solve these legal problems. When I first became a lawyer, we used to say to clients, well, I don't know, I'm not your social worker, right? We were like, we fix the legal problem. These other problems don't belong to us. That's not true. I don't know that it's really ever been true. And so we really hope that the entire legal community will come to be more respectful of social workers, which a lot of people are not, and understand their value, which is enormous. So we as lawyers and law faculty need to say we need the services of other professionals to properly help our clients.
Agreed.
I'll tell you, my husband's a judge and we've been doing this forever. And he said, oh yeah, I had a client guy come in today, and I said, and he thought he was being progressive. He was like, I told him, come back with the social worker. And we were cringed and also laughed at him because we thought if anybody should know how hard it is to get a mental health social worker, it's, the spouse of the person who's doing it. But hopefully it's improving.
And another big part of my job and a practicum student's job is oftentimes I think an attorney is like, okay, I got a social worker. And then that means that they can fix this problem. And they don't understand that a social worker cannot invent a place for someone to live. They cannot start a program that doesn't exist or have funding. And normally it takes them a while, but they'll get that. And so then the job becomes, I think social workers are well suited to explain the landscape to the judge or the prosecutor so that they kind of understand what's going on. When I do my mental health class, we do the diagnoses and stuff, but we also kind of say, how do you think someone travels through the mental health system when they have their first episode of whatever it is? And inevitably students will kind of say, oh, they call a doctor, they get an appointment, they go to the appointment, they get their medicine, and then they have a follow-up appointment. And we kind of go through, well, this is what really happens to our clients. Let's look at the places in our area that only take Medicaid, which is where our clients go. And let's look at their turnover rate for doctors. And let's look at how long they're spending with each patient. And let's look at what their wait list is so that we can explain to a judge or a prosecutor who may think, well, this person had an appointment at this clinic and it didn't do anything. So we tried it, move on. I think social workers are well positioned to explain why things are not quick fixes and what to anticipate when we're trying to get someone help.
And just out of curiosity, are there any mental health courts in your jurisdiction? And how are you all involved in that?
Sue?
Yeah, I knew you were going to make me say this. We are not fans of mental health courts.
Okay.
We think that they are coercive. They punish people for not abiding to their medical regimen. They make rules and requirements that are very difficult for a poor person, much less a poor person with mental health problems, to survive. And so in a perfect world, we would supply that without involving a mental health court. We had a mental health court assign some kind of cuckoo, I don't know how to explain about this woman to a client of ours, and it couldn't have been a worse match. But no one was really concerned about that. She was a kind of woo-woo, with all due respect to everybody who follows astrology-based therapist. He was a young Black, 19, 20-year-old client. And they do their best, but in my experience, they don't get it. Lauren, would you agree?
Yes. And I think part of the problem is it is so based on what kind of commissioner or judge you have running it. So I know that there are some out there that maybe don't look like this or are better because of who's running it. But I mean, a system that's so dependent on someone being benevolent and having a good understanding of what someone's going through isn't a good system, because we've seen so many people who are amazing lawyers and have spent their life in the legal community working with folks and who have very good intentions, go to a weekend mental health seminar and then try and run a mental health court. And it just sets our clients up to get more violations. And especially if they have to plead to get in, we feel like it just sets them up to fail.
we had a client who got kicked out because other people in his family smoked pot around him. And the judge was like, oh, I understand that he's not smoking pot, but the family members are smoking pot around him. And we're like, he is intellectually disabled. He is poor. He has nowhere to live except for with his family. And you might have rules, but they're not practical. They're out of a book. They're not from working with people, having the lived experience.
So I think you're sugarcoating it. He also did not go to his dentist appointments.
I did forget he did not go to our dentist appointments.
And that was a big deal for the judge. Yeah.
Yeah, and the judge pointed that out in removing him from the court. You know, so we had another client who got shot in the leg and they wouldn't let him leave the courtroom and go to the emergency room because he had to wait for his turn to see the people he met with. And we actually had to go over there, and the poor kid had like the cover of a matchbook over the bullet hole in his leg. So we are very jaded when it comes to mental health courts.
And still, we're going to open it up for questions, but do you have any closing thoughts before we go into questions?
I would just say this has been a great experience. If anybody else is thinking of incorporating social workers into their clinic, it's the only reason I'm still practicing, I say.
And for the social workers who are on this call, it is such a fun and interesting and impactful way to be a social worker. And it can be daunting and scary because there's not a lot of manuals or people who can be like, this is exactly how you do it and what it looks like. But if you reach out to me or the social workers who do this, we love talking to people about it. So if you cold email anyone that you find that is a social worker that works in this field, they will be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Well, I want to take this time to thank you both so much for joining us, and Quo for moderating the conversation. We really, really appreciate the wonderful insight you shared today. I did also want to share an episode that we will have for in February that Lauren actually forecasted as she was speaking of law students and mental health. So episode 3 will be with Professor Miriam Martin as moderator with our guest Malika Cower from the Domestic Violence Field Placement Program. She is a lecturer in law at Berkeley and then professor of law and the Frank C. Newman International Human Rights Clinic director at the University of San Francisco School of Law. Lindsay Harris will be joining our wonderful colleague to talk about clinic and their evolving approach to self-care. So very much touching on the issue Lauren forecasted today. With that, thank you to all our guests and especially to you, Lauren and Sue.
Thank you
Thank
for
you so
inviting
much.
us.